You ever get that feeling, like that pressure to be perfect?
Huh?
And you're so afraid to show any weakness.
Oh, yeah.
It's something I think we all grapple with.
Absolutely.
You know, you've shared some of Brené Brown's work with us.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta say, her research on courage, vulnerability, and shame, it really struck a chord with me.
Yeah.
It's like she's giving a voice to these universal experiences we often keep hidden.
What's so compelling about Brown is that she doesn't shy away from her own struggles.
Right.
In her book, The Courage to be Imperfect.
Yeah.
And even in her famous TED Talk, she openly discusses her own journey with vulnerability.
I think that's what makes her so relatable.
It does.
It makes her insights so powerful.
It makes it real for people.
Yeah, and it's so refreshing to hear someone so accomplished
Yeah.
admit to feeling inadequate sometimes, you
Oh,
know?
yeah.
It makes you realize you're not alone
Totally.
in these struggles.
You're in good company.
But she goes beyond just acknowledging these feelings.
Yeah.
She actually reframes vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
arguing that it's not a weakness but a strength,
Right.
which seems kind of counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does. But think about it this way.
Okay.
Innovation, creativity, change. None of that happens when we're playing it safe.
Right.
True growth requires us to step outside our comfort zones, to risk failure, to be open to the unknown.
So you're saying that vulnerability is actually necessary?
It is.
It takes courage.
The courage to be vulnerable.
So in a sense, by shutting down our vulnerability, we're also shutting down our potential for real connection
Yes.
and growth.
Brown argues that vulnerability is the birthplace of joy,
Oh, wow.
love, belonging. All of those things we crave as humans.
It's the key to living a wholehearted life.
It is.
You know, that makes me think about all the times I've held back from sharing an idea at work
Mm-hmm.
because I was afraid of being judged
Sure.
or avoided a difficult conversation with a loved one to avoid conflict.
Yeah.
And in those moments, I was choosing self-protection over the potential for a deeper connection.
And those choices have consequences.
Yeah.
When we shy away from vulnerability, we limit our experiences, our relationships, and ultimately ourselves.
It's interesting because speaking of authenticity,
Yeah.
Brown makes a fascinating distinction between shame and guilt.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that for us?
Absolutely. This is one of Brown's most important contributions.
Okay.
Guilt is about our actions,
Uh-huh.
the feeling of, I did something bad.
Okay.
Shame, on the other hand, attacks our very being.
Wow.
It's the feeling of, I am bad.
That's a powerful distinction.
It is.
It's like guilt points to a specific behavior we can change,
Right.
while shame tells us we're inherently flawed.
Exactly. Guilt can motivate us to apologize,
Yeah.
make amends,
Yeah.
do better next time.
Okay.
Shame, however, sends us spiraling into hiding and disconnection.
Mhm.
It keeps us stuck.
So how does this play out in real life? Can you give us an example of how shame and guilt manifest differently?
Imagine a child who's been caught lying. If they experience guilt, they might think, I shouldn't have lied, I need to tell the truth.
Right.
But if they experience shame,
Yeah.
the thought might be, I'm a bad person. I'm not worthy of love.
Wow.
That's a much heavier burden to carry.
Yeah, you can see how that shame can impact a child's self-esteem
Absolutely.
and future choices.
Yeah.
They might become afraid to take risks or try new things because they're convinced they'll just mess up again.
Right. And that's why Brown emphasizes empathy
Okay.
as the antidote to shame.
Empathy.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's about connecting with someone else's experience without judgment.
Tell me more about that.
It's about seeing the world through their eyes, even if you don't agree with their choices.
Okay.
When we offer empathy to someone who's struggling with shame, we're saying, you're not alone. I see you, I hear you, and I understand.
That's powerful.
It is.
You know, Brown tells a story in her book about a woman who finally gathered the courage to tell her friends she was having financial problems.
Yes. And instead of judging her or offering unsolicited advice, their friends responded with compassion and understanding.
That's amazing.
They shared their own struggles, offered support, and created a safe space for her vulnerability.
That's such a powerful example of how empathy can diffuse shame.
Yes.
It shifts the experience from one of isolation and fear to one of connection and hope.
Exactly. And that story highlights how powerful it can be to create those spaces where vulnerability is welcomed and met with compassion.
It really makes you realize how often we withhold those parts of ourselves, fearing judgment or rejection.
Yeah.
But in doing so, we miss out on the opportunity for real connection.
And that fear of judgment often stems from the pressure we all feel to be perfect.
Oh, absolutely.
We live in a world that constantly bombards us with images and messages
Yeah.
that promote this unattainable ideal.
It's everywhere.
That is.
Social media, advertising,
Yeah.
even in our own self-talk. It's like we're always striving to measure up to some impossible standard.
And that's exactly what Brown calls the perfection myth. She argues that this pursuit of perfection is not only impossible, but also incredibly damaging.
How so?
It sets us up for constant disappointment, self-criticism, and a fear of failure that can paralyze us.
So it's actually counterproductive.
It is.
The more we chase perfection, the further we get from actually living a fulfilling life.
Precisely. It's a trap. And I've seen firsthand how this plays out in people's lives.
Really?
I used to work with someone who was incredibly talented, but so terrified of making a mistake that she would spend hours agonizing over every tiny detail.
Wow.
It was painful to watch her perfectionism sabotage her own success.
It's a good example of how this fear of not being perfect can actually hold us back.
Yeah.
It's like we're so focused on avoiding mistakes
Yeah.
that we miss out on the opportunity to learn and grow.
Exactly. And that's why Brown advocates for embracing authenticity
Okay.
instead of chasing this elusive idea of perfection.
Authenticity as freedom.
Yeah.
I love that. Can we dig a little deeper into that? What does it really mean to be authentic?
It's about being honest with ourselves and others, about who we are, flaws and all. It's about embracing our strengths and our weaknesses, our quirks and our imperfections,
Right.
and letting go of the need to present a perfectly curated version of ourselves to the world.
It sounds incredibly liberating,
It is.
but I imagine it's easier said than done.
It is a journey,
Yeah.
and it takes courage.
What advice would you give to someone who's struggling to embrace their authentic self?
I'd say the first step is to identify those areas in your life where you're striving for unattainable perfection.
Okay.
Is it in your work, your relationships, your appearance? Where do you feel the most pressure to perform or conform?
So once you've identified those areas, what's next?
Then start challenging the thoughts and beliefs that are fueling that perfectionism.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen if I let go of this need to be perfect? Often we build up these catastrophic scenarios in our minds that rarely, if ever, come to pass.
That's so true. And so much of that fear is rooted in a fear of judgment, right?
Absolutely.
We worry about what others will think if we don't meet their expectations.
But here's the thing. Everyone is imperfect.
Right.
Everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah.
And honestly, people are usually far more forgiving than we give them credit for.
It's like we're so caught up in our own insecurities that we project them onto others,
Right, sure.
assuming they're judging us just as harshly.
Exactly.
Right.
And even if they do notice our imperfections, so what?
Yeah.
It's impossible to please everyone.
Right.
And trying to do so just leads to inauthenticity and exhaustion.
It reminds me of that saying, what other people think of me is none of my business.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one.
The more we can let go of that need for external validation, the more freedom we have to be ourselves.
Absolutely.
You know, it's so empowering to think about shifting our focus, from trying to please everyone else to really owning who we are, imperfections and all.
It is. And the beautiful thing is, when we embrace our own authenticity, it gives others permission to do the same.
Oh, wow.
It creates a ripple effect of courage and vulnerability. I love that. It's like by showing up as our true selves, we're inviting others to do the same, creating a more genuine and compassionate world.
Exactly. And that's ultimately what Brown is advocating for.
Yeah.
A world where we value connection over perfection, where we embrace our shared humanity and support each other through the messy, beautiful journey of life.
That brings us back to Brown's core message about the courage to be imperfect.
Yeah.
It's not about hiding our flaws or pretending to have it all together.
Right.
It's about having the courage to be authentically ourselves, even when it feels scary.
And to allow others that same freedom.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but the source of our greatest strengths.
It's the birthplace of creativity, innovation, and deep connection.
Absolutely.
It's about letting go of the myth of perfection and embracing the beauty of our perfectly imperfect selves. It's about choosing courage over comfort, connection over isolation, and wholehearted living over a life spent striving for an unattainable ideal.
And remember, this isn't a destination. It's an ongoing journey.
Right.
It's about showing up each day with the intention to be a little braver, a little more vulnerable, and a little more authentically ourselves.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into Brené Brown's work. It's one thing to read about these concepts, but to really unpack them and explore their implications in our own lives, that's where the real transformation happens. So as you wrap up, I want to leave you with this question. What's one area in your life where you could practice the courage to be imperfect? Where could you let go of the need to be perfect? And embrace your authentic self. It might feel a little scary at first, but I assure you the rewards are worth it. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep diving deep.